All right, friends, we're here to finish off our series on prayer. Quick review as we do when we start, because I know not everybody's here every week. We had 3 weeks in January looking at verbal and liturgical text-based prayer. We looked at the Book of Common Prayer and some of the things that are in it that are beyond just the Sunday morning liturgies. We looked at that next week. We looked at the daily office, which we all agreed was highly complicated and not terribly easy to navigate, but we had some good little tools and tricks through technology and other things that can help us to pray the daily office, should that be a discipline that we choose. Then we had a little break, and then we had sort of a sharing session of other resources, other forms of prayer, other prayer books that exist out there for those who really enjoy engaging with the language of prayer and for whom words and metaphors and poetry become a really illustrative to their own connection with God. We also, in that time, were talking about how prayer is meant to be a practice of God's presence in your life, of encountering the holy, of that which is deeper or fuller or richer than our immediate experience. And so we talk about how language can help us with that, but also its limitations in terms of bringing us to that place, which is why our Sunday services are not just spoken. There is also music, there's times of quiet, and then there's ritual and sacrament and physical things that happen as well. So that was the first few weeks. Then we moved into this idea of silent prayer or centering prayer, the disciplines and habits of which help us in a lot of forms of prayer, being able to still ourselves in body and in mind and be open, practicing that sense of awareness, of attentiveness to God's moving in your mind, in your heart, even in your body as well. So that was an important one for us to do. And then last week moved into the practices of Lectio Divina and the Ignatian Examen. So this sense of guided reflections, like questions you could ask, which still require a certain amount of attentiveness, of quiet, of stillness, of slowness, of slowing down. And remember, we importantly talked about how, reading, like the holy reading of Lectio Divina, requires us to read in a different way, to encounter scripture or a text without our analytical lens. That has its place. Don't ever hear me saying that that is not important. But when we're coming to the text for a devotional engagement, we need to lay that aside a little bit in order to allow ourselves to let the words work on us at a deeper level or a different level than it might be if we're trying to figure out, wait, who's talking here? Or what's the point of what's being said? Or what happened right before? What's coming next? All of that, good, important, not the focus of that kind of reading. And then we ended with some instruction about the Ignatian Examen, which is, instead of using a text for reflection, using your day, your experiences, your life, as a chance to be able to come in. Come on in, Andrew, we have speed up front here. A chance to sort of use that as a portal, as a doorway into some deeper reflections and understandings. So really what these tools are meant to do is do just that. They're meant to focus us. They're meant to give us something through which we enter into this broader landscape. And that is where we encounter God, and who knows what else we'll find. So that's what these things are for. Today, we're going to use a different portal, a different doorway, and we're going to talk about visual prayer. This is for people who are keyed into the sense of the divine through visual things, the same way there are visual learners and auditory learners, etc. So the same thing happens with our prayer. If prayer is learning to pay attention, as Simone Weil said, then this is just another way to help us pay attention. And it can be done with, works of art. It can be done with nature. It can be done with with a lot of different things. But we're going to particularly focus on icons, which are devotional creations made to be engaged with in prayer. They're not meant for decoration. They're not meant for a museum, even. They are created in prayer and meant to be used in prayer. And so what we see is just as possible as a place of encounter with the divine than as what we read or what we hear. So all these things are meant to help us, knowing that we all have our different styles and personalities and proclivities as far as what might work. So icons Who has heard of icons before? Who has even anyone used icons in prayer? Okay, so people have heard of it. Anyone used icons in prayer before? A handful of folks. Okay. So I have a rudimentary example, and then I've got I'll hand out some pictures as well here in just a second. Actually, I'm going to hand those around now while I talk about them, so you guys can look at them and not listen to me. Jake, there you go. There's a couple of them I'm going to send around. Take one, pass them down. And next here. These are two famous ones. The Christo Pantocrator, with Christ, the ruler of the universe, which is over in, where is it? Andrew, can I grab that one for a second? It's in Sinai, on Mount Sinai, in a monastery there. Oh, it's too late. I'm behind. I lost it. 6th century it dates to. We'll talk a little bit more about what you can see in this kind of icon in just a second. But this is from a monastery in Mount Sinai. The other is the famous Rublev Trinity icon from the 15th century, 1425. So these are very old. The Rublev icon's kind of new by comparison, right? But this 6th century painting and drawing of the Pantocrator, ruler of the universe from Sinai, is another example of this. So this idea of icons or images, icon is literally a Greek word that means image or resemblance. You remember the line from Colossians where the author writes, Jesus is the image of the invisible God. And the word used there for image is icon. Jesus is the icon of the invisible God. So when we're thinking about why icons are a form of prayer, it's scriptural. This sense of something you can see, helping you to see or experience that which you cannot see. And that's the point. And Jesus functions very much in that way. They're sometimes called windows into heaven, because like we said, there are these little portals through which we are supposed to enter into this broader landscape of experience. And they're meant to be, it's a little bit tricky, but they're meant to be like engaged with as they are, but really meant to sort of lead us beyond themselves. So like windows, they're meant to sort of be present and help us to see outside. A room that has no windows, you can't see outside, but you're not meant to look at the window. You hear what I'm saying? There's a little bit of a distinction there that I think is important. Hey, Christine. So for us to engage with them, we need to, the same way we're engaging with Scripture differently when we're coming at it with Lectio Divina, we're not engaging in an artistic critique or analysis of the piece that is in front of us. All right? Sometimes they're highly stylized. Sometimes you might not even think they're pretty. It's not about an aesthetic engagement or experience with them. It's about using them to help get to that next level. Is that clear? Am I making sense? So same idea of the text in Lectio Divina is meant to lead us into that greater thing that is beyond. And the assumption behind all these prayer practices is that there is something beyond that we are hoping to engage with, right? And we shouldn't take that for granted necessarily. Icons are most popular in Eastern Orthodox traditions. Many of you know that. And they date back to the earliest centuries of the church. They're very ancient. They are not artwork, like I said. They are created in a prayerful way. You do not draw an icon or paint an icon. You write an icon. That's the Greek word. So in the same way you write, or you'll hear in our collect, or you'll hear in our epistle today, that the scriptures were written by those who were inspired by God, that they were channeling God. Icons are viewed in very much the same way. So that's, again, an artist may understand their work to be like that, but many of them perhaps don't. People who are writing icons do not understand themselves as artists necessarily, if there's a distinction. They're not making it for that kind of engagement. It's not an aesthetic engagement, it's a spiritual engagement.
That's why they never sign their name.
Good point. That's why they never sign their name. You don't know necessarily at the corner who did it. They're usually painted on wooden panels of varying sizes, something that might look like this. And they have a very distinctive visual style, usually. In fact, the Christo Pantocrator looks the most sort of naturalistic of most icons that you might see. There's often a lot of gold leaf. It's not meant to look like a natural representation of bodies moving in space. If you look at the Rublev icon, they have that sort of angular components. And that's partially because of where art was at these different times of their creation, but also part of it because they're not trying to make them pretty or break new artistic ground or do something like that. All right?
But they are.
But they are. They very often are, with those not being the goal necessarily. So they can also be mosaics, they can be frescoes, they can be made of metal, they can be made of other forms. So it's not necessary that an icon is on wood in a little square. Most often they are, but not always. And the idea of an image, now it's worth pointing out when we're talking about icons that the idea of an image that becomes our portal for prayer is not without controversy in the history of the church. Right? So these early days, so very much early in the church, the idea of art or visual representations of God or Jesus or the Trinity, right in front of you, was not so controversial. But as things go along, there's this fear of idolatry, right? This fear that the thing is mistaken for that which lies beyond the thing, that the signpost meant to point you to your destination is mistaken for the destination itself. And that is a constant and continual criticism within the church. So you get literal iconoclastic moments, people who are smashing icons or paintings or picture or stained glass or candles or whatever it is that might smack of some sort of something that would pull your attention away from the divine. And that, I think, was a sort of severe misunderstanding of how those things were meant to be utilized. Sure, people will get distracted and they will worship this little thing as if it were the thing. But these were always meant as devotional tools to point us beyond to something grander and more wonderful. Okay? So, especially around the Protestant Reformation, this becomes a major issue, where people are literally smashing icons or statues or stained glass windows or whatever it may be. And it became rather problematic. So how do they work? They're not unlike the way that Scripture worked in Lectio Divina or the way your day works in the Examen. They're meant to be the focal point for your portal for your prayer. And the idea is that as you are looking at them, it sort of gathers you. You gather yourself to be able to enter into this, but it's meant to gather you, give you a focus, and then you start to notice things. And you just sort of open yourself. You notice things in the painting, but also notice things in yourself as you engage with, not the painting, in the icon, as you engage with it. That then is meant to open you up into some deeper, giving you some broader ground for reflection and engagement. Remember that meditation that we talked about, the chewing in the Lectio Divina, this time of what are these things that are popping out to me from these pictures? And then you sort of sit with that and let that turn into the content of your prayer. Maybe there's something in what I'm noticing that's important for me to sit with for a little bit. And then the hope is you have enough time and enough energy and enough focus to be able to sort of then kind of melt into a place of less sort of articulated prayer and more just sort of steeping in that spirit of prayer, just sort of abiding or dwelling in that sense of presence that you've begun to engage with. And again, you've moved beyond the physical image at that point very often. But just like the word in centering prayer that can help call us back or give us a focus, this is something that we can look at that does that. So really, it's not that different than other forms of prayer. It just has a different entry point. Does that make sense? So we're not going to do that yet, but I just want to point out a few little details. Do we have any extras of those, or did we run out? Good. AJ, you got some there? Yeah. I just want to point out a few little details that might be interesting. We're going to have some time together in a few minutes once I talk about something else for you to try, either some icons or praying in color, which we'll talk about in a second. So, but looking at the image of Christ, the ruler of the universe, some of the important things that people have noticed over the years is that his face is not symmetrical, right? And those of you who've seen this before, I hope someone has pointed that out to you, right? If you looking at it, the left side, the light is coming, it seems, from outside the frame across the face. And there's a brightness to the eye, there's a little bit of an upturn to the lip. It looks like either a happy or serious or strong presence. And then if you look to the other side, some people have said it looks like he's crying from that eye. right? So you get that mixture of Christ, the ruler of the universe, who continues to bear the sorrows of the world, which is an interesting thing. You've got his hands holding a big, beautiful book. You've got lots that you can engage with there, and obviously surrounded by the halo, his own hair functioning as something of a backdrop for the glory that lies behind it. The dark and the light all mixing together in here. The Rublev icon of the Trinity, if you turn your page, you have more time to look at it if you want in a few minutes. The Rublev icon is interesting because you've got these three, what look like, women or angels sitting around a table, and the whole thing is oriented sort of towards you as the viewer. So as you engage with it, there looks like there's almost a seat at the table for you, right? And you are asked to enter into this mystery of the Trinity by looking at this. There's different colors that you can engage with, right? There's the greens and the blues and the reds. Obviously, it's faded, so it doesn't have the glory that it did when it was painted 600 years ago. But you've got opportunities for things. You've got a bowl with what looks like bread on it, very much a sort of Eucharistic reality in the center of this Trinity. Nancy, come in. Find a seat. Don't be shy. No, we haven't handed out too much yet. And then there's things to wonder about and notice. What's that little square under the table in the middle there? It looks like they're writing on it, but it looks almost like some sort of symbol or something. I don't know. So all that to say, you've got some things to ponder as you look at this one as well. All right, so hold on to these. We'll come back to them. Just to let you know, what I also have up here is, that's for praying in color. I have a series of wood blocks that weren't necessarily carved on these. These are reproductions of them. But they are the Stations of the Cross. And so you get a different station of all 14 stations along the way. You've got Jesus is stripped of his garments. You've got Jesus speaks to the women of Jerusalem. You've got all these different ones. And in a minute, when it's time for us to practice a little bit, I'll leave these out. You can grab one of these if you want to sort of engage with this in a form of prayer. So these are small little ones that you can look at as well when the time comes. But this looks a little more like a traditional icon might look that you'd see that had been created or was hanging in someone's house or something like that. All right? Questions about icons before we move to praying in color? Yeah, Kevin.
The ceiling in the Sistine Chapel on Michelangelo.
Yeah.
Would that be considered icon?
I don't think it was drawn or written as such. But I would also say that doesn't mean you can't engage with it in the same way that you might in an icon. So I think it might not quite be accurate to call it an icon. I think you can use the same disciplines or practices of engaging visually with a work of art that is meant to draw you beyond itself with a fabulous, fantastic work of art, which is really what we do, or what we sort of learn to do as we learn to appreciate art, right? Is sort of engage with the image, but also engage with what it does to us and what it makes us think about or feel, and that, if we want to, if we're really able to take the time and be intentional about it, can turn into a form of prayer as well.
Side comment, I was there in 1991 and it was being cleaned.
Okay.
Because of aging. And
Yeah.
So I couldn't see it.
Oh, no! Oh, Kevin. Oh, man.
There in 56, and I could see it.
Okay.
Kathy, yeah.
A few years ago, there was a special exhibit on
Yeah.
icons.
Oh, good.
I'm sure several of the people have seen them, but they were presented there as art.
Yeah.
And I spent some time in Eastern Europe and Russia, and with the people in whose homes I visited, they had a corner,
Yeah.
for the most part, with an icon
Yeah.
and some other things. And it really was used. As
It was
you
devotion,
described.
yeah.
Right, as a devotion. So there seems like there's kind of a dichotomy between how icons are seen,
Yes.
depending upon your culture.
It's exactly right. I mean, it's a similar way that you would go into some museums or something and you'd see, those illustrated manuscripts of the Bible or something like that. They're not asking you to read the text and engage with it spiritually, but they're saying, isn't this interesting? Isn't this wonderful? Isn't this important in the development of whatever, throughout human history? But I think it's, not giving them quite their due to treat them strictly or only as art. Yeah, but that's a good point. And yes, oftentimes if you're into like families that are Eastern Orthodox or Russian Orthodox, they have like a corner where there's at least one, sometimes many, of these, and candles and sort of a little altar, a little prayer corner that develops around these. Dan, question?
Contemporarily,
Yeah.
iconic doesn't seem to relate to my vision or your vision of icons or
Yeah.
as being a supreme representation. Boy, that was an iconic shot he made.
Yes. I think I think the idea of why that word might have gotten used originally was because it was sort of almost a transcendent moment that was created by, that was iconic. It was so great. It was, lifted me to a higher plane or something like that. So I think in that there's some root there that it shares. But yes, we do use it a little casually when in this sense there's a very specific meaning for what an icon is when it comes to devotional representations. Other questions? All right. Praying in color. Can prayer be fun? Does it always have to be so serious? These are the questions we are asked in praying in color. Nancy thinks it can't be fun. That's right. Just kidding. There is something to breaking us out of this solemnness and seriousness of prayer. That's not just, let's, not take ourselves so seriously, but there's actually something in it in the sense that, Jesus tells us about sort of that the childlike state, which often is a place of wonder and fun and play and joy, is actually the fullest state of how we might enter into the kingdom of heaven, right? Like that's actually better than our adulterated version of things, right? If unadulterated is pure and good and etc., adulterated, I think, we adult things by ruining them, muddying them up at least. And for that, I think it's just important to open up the opportunity for prayer and being prayerful and playful. Might that be a way to engage with it? And like any dietitian will tell you, if you enjoy your practice, your habits, your discipline, you're more likely to do it and to keep it. So we're going to talk about a form of prayer that I've never tried, but Kathy, when we were talking together about prayer, she said, you need to talk about praying in color, because everyone thinks it's silly until they do it, and then they think, wait a minute, this could really work. I will tell you in the sermon today, and this wasn't planned, but it just happens, but I'll tell you in the sermon, I have zero artistic ability. Like drawing to me is not fun because I stink at it. And my kids will tell you that when they say, Dad, draw us a car. And they'll be like, okay. And they'll think, oh, it's a car. And they go, that doesn't look like a car at all. So they're harsh critics. But this sense of delight is something that I think I would do well to encourage in my own life of prayer as well. So that's why I want to share it with you. And again, the idea is still that it helps focus you and center you. It's not a disparate fun. It's not a sort of light, sort of bouncing from thing to thing, but it does help you do something that you might enjoy and look at that as a form of prayer. There's more than one way to do this, but the person who's really been good about promoting it and articulating a good way to do it is Sybil Macbeth. Has anybody ever seen any of her work or done anything that she's heard about? Blair? Jim? Okay, good. She runs workshops all over the place, and she's got a whole little outline for how to do this. She's got a whole book for kids as well if they want to pray in color. So there's ways to go. The way it works is that, again, this is just a general outline that you can then literally fill in yourself. You start with a shape. You're going to be doodling, is the bottom line. You're going to doodle with God. And that's what praying in color is. So you start with a shape at the center of your paper. And then they ask you to write a name for God. Again, that idea of a word or a name or something to focus your attention in there. If you can't think of a name, there's lots of names for God in Scripture. You may have a name for God that you've come up with yourself. That's for you to put in there. If you can't, leave it blank as the symbol of the mystery of the divine that sits at the heart of all things. Then you start to doodle. You just doodle. And in this sense, you are doing what you'd be doing if you're calm, closing your eyes and calming your heart. You're just sort of trying to spend some time in the presence of God. But rather than, being quiet or still or, in that meditative state, what we think of as meditative state, you're just kind of adding some lines and pictures and drawings, etc. And while you're doing that, the hope is you can remain somewhat open and listening to where things start stirring. And if you like, or you're able to, those things that start stirring in you come out on the page. You can add some shapes. You can start bringing in color into, color little sections of it, one thing or another thing. Each little addition is sort of offered up and intentionally to God. So there's an intentionality behind it, which really is the distinction between doodling to doodle and doodling with God. And that could be enough. You could just spend time writing a name of God and doodling around it, if that's where you need to just spend some time. But you do not and cannot or should not be your own art critic. I'll tell you that again, to say like, oh, that was stupid. Why did I draw that? Or like, that looks terrible. Let me erase it. Like, that's not the point. You're off track then. These need never be shown to anyone. They're meant to be expressions of what's going on in you. And for some people, I know they listen better, they focus better when they do that. I will be fully honest with you. I am not one of those people. So I have never tried this because I thought that I'd be terrible at it, even though there's no way to be bad at it. That's just the way I am. I'm just trying to be honest with you. You may be with me here. Or you may be saying, I was one of those people in my notebook at school who was doodling and everyone thought I wasn't paying attention, but that was actually how I was listening. So this is meant to sort of be an access point for you all as well. Or for those of you who may be a little high and mighty and think that can't possibly work, well, I've read and heard from enough people I respect that it does, that it's worth bringing forward. You can also then expand upon this. Sort of the next layer is to use this as a form of intercessory prayer, which we haven't talked a lot about, the different forms of prayer. But intercessory prayer is praying for someone or something. So if you have people who've said, could you pray for me because of X, Y, Z? You hopefully, or maybe, take that seriously and bring that person with you, carry them on your heart. And you may have a list, you may have a sort of mental list of people you're praying for. Why not add their names in a little shape onto this same page that is got God in the center of it? And then doodle around their name as well. Because really, when you're doing intercessory prayer, what you're doing is trying to hold that person, the idea of that person, in God's presence, asking for God's presence to be made known to them in whatever they're dealing with, hardship, celebration, whatever. So that they might, the hope being they might have access to that presence of power or healing or strength or courage or joy that you believe is available to all of us. So why not pull them onto the page and start to sort of bring them into the presence of God visually, so that you in your own mind and heart can be praying for that person. For that's sort of what you're being asked to do anyways when you're sitting there quietly and afraid to move. Right? One sec, Nancy, I'm going to finish this off and then I'll take some questions. That's fine. Because if we're asking God to be involved in the lives of people we care about, or asking them to be aware of God's presence or involvement in their lives already, which is often the case, it makes sense. One of the things that Sybil Macbeth says is it's sort of like speaking in tongues, but with your fingers, where you're meant to sort of let loose a little and let go and see what comes out. And I know we're not a speaking in tongues group. Some of us may have come from that world or seen it happen, but that's really what you're doing in those moments. As I understand it, you're sort of just letting it come out. And usually it sounds like nonsense, but there's this sense of spirit that is being transmitted. So you can repeat this as necessary, as many people as you want. And then whatever your prayer time is, or your practice or your discipline, before you say goodbye to your page, take a moment to sit with it and sort of offer it up, like this is what came out today. And here it is. And step back just a second to look at it, or more than a second. And then offer that up, those people, that ideas, this time that we had, the same way that those of you who've, you've had a really good conversation over lunch with a friend, you'd be like, you know what? Thank you so much for this conversation. or thank you for this time. It meant a lot to me, and I'm acknowledging that to sort of bring it to a close. And that's an important part of prayer as well, so that you can then sort of tie it off, and you could either come back to this same page the next day and start adding to it and developing it, or you can start a whole new one if this becomes a practice you want to take on in a regular way. You can take the page with you. You could burn it. You could throw it away if you want. But really holding on to it might be a nice way of sort of capturing some of those holy moments in your prayer life. And you could look back and almost like a diary to say, I've been doing this, and this is what's been coming out, and maybe there are patterns or things emerging, etc., as you go through. As you do, you can add specific names to, or specific words next to a person's name. I'm praying for courage for them. I'm praying for peace for this person. I'm praying for healing for that, to try to help focus it. And you really then, by the end of it, in your own way, have created your own little icon, right? It has been written or drawn in a spirit of prayer that is meant to be devotional. Now, there have been other ways of doing this. Sybil did not invent this. This is a little mandala someone gave me, right? The same idea of a sense of coloring in a pattern or a shape, and sort of just, it's more formal than a doodle, right? But it is a similar idea that some people will use. They'll use pages that have already been set out with like a form to be colored in, as opposed to creating the shape themselves. That may work better for you too. Same idea, though, of being intentional about it. So, we're going to take the next, let's say, 10 minutes, which I know is short, but like we've been doing, taking a taste of some of these things, and we're going to try these out. So you have before you a couple of icons that are printed out. If you want to turn that over, we have, I'm going to bring this with me here, we have also these ones here. If you want to come forward and grab this, you can grab some of these icons of the cross. You can take a peek at those. Kathy generously got us some crayons and plenty of clipboards and colored pencils. So if you want to come forward and try some praying in color, you're welcome to do so. Grab a handful of those. And don't be shy about it. No one look over each other's shoulders. Keep your eyes on your own paper. There you go. I have some teachers in here. They're going to be watching you. So that we don't have a sense of insecurity or fear about it. But let's take 10 minutes before we wrap up this series and go for it. So if you want to do some icon staring, do that. If you want to do some coloring, come on up and do that, okay? So don't be shy. Go for it. Nancy, you had a question? Can I answer that while you're coming forward?
Yeah, it's really related to that. So just to be clear, there's nothing really scripted or that you're saying to yourself while you're doing this?
No, just whatever it is to help you focus. Yeah. Yeah. All right, come on up here, guys. Don't be shy.
You want the rattlesnakes now?
Vince, I'm going to make you pray in color here. Go ahead, give it a try, guys.
Start drawing on the same page, and see what develops.
Don't be afraid for it to be fun and kind of interesting and creative, all right? And those of you watching at home, you can do it too. Go ahead. Oh, beautiful. Wow.
All the paths are Hebrew letters, which
Yeah.
all have their own color, as
That's
well
cool.
as their own note. And then these are the holy Sephiras,
Nice.
aspects of God. This isn't Kabbalic.
That's right. I imagined it was coming from you, but that's cool. I never heard of that. That's good. All right. While we're asking people to do this, we are going to try to be prayerful. So let's try to be a little bit quiet. All right, David. Sorry, you guys can continue afterwards. I'm going to try to give everybody their quiet space. So I'll let you know.
One of my two brothers.
He does this kind of stuff? Awesome, that's cool.
I never quit.
Good, well, here you Take about 2 or 3 more minutes. All right, 1 minute. Alrighty, friends, let's pause what we're doing. You are free to continue this on your own. You can don't take my little plaques home with you, but take the pictures. Take your picture if you made one. Feel free to take those home. I just want to, we're coming up to time, but I just want to spend 1 minute together thinking about what we've been talking about these last 6 weeks or so. And say the whole purpose behind these was to educate us, yes, but also to equip and encourage us into this life of prayer. It is, as we've talked about, a discipline, a habit that one must make time for. And I'm preaching to myself as much as I am to you when I say that. One's relationship with God needs tending, just like one's relationship with anyone or anything else. And so these are meant to expose you, these sessions are meant to expose you to a whole panoply of opportunities and options for how to tend that relationship. But it will ultimately be on you to pick up 1 or 2 of these and even fuse them together and start to develop what is your own prayer practice. So I won't pretend to tell you how to do this, only to encourage you to do so and to make the effort. Because I don't just believe, but I have experienced the truth of giving one's time in a practice or a discipline or a habit to prayer and having one's life of faith enlivened in ways that you might not even expect, probably don't expect. Lent is a great time to try that for a little while, to take on a new practice or a habit or a discipline. We're encouraged, exhorted to do so, and we'll talk about that on Wednesday. But I would encourage you in your own life to think about what you might want to pick up and carry forward from these sessions and try out for 40 days and 40 nights. If you'd like some companionship on that journey, there is a wellness circle that's being run through the curriculum of something called Living Compass, which will be on well-being in general, but I imagine, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, that prayer and one's inner life will be a component of that as well. So we will have at least one, if not two, small groups forming, and there's been information that's been circulating about that through the email and are up on our website, and so those will be starting, I think, next week, first Sunday of Lent. And so David and Heidi Anderson, who many of you know, former senior warden, will be helping to lead that up. So if you would like to be a part of a small group during Lent that is encouraging practices of well-being and wholeness in many senses, I would encourage you to do so. So that's it for now. We're still working out the details of where we go from here for our Lenten adult formation series and study, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to continue in this time, the 9:15 to 10 time, as we move through Lent as well. But any final questions or comments? Was this interesting, helpful these last 6 weeks? Mildly enjoyable at least? Yeah, okay. Well, good. Well, I'm glad for that. Well, no, thank you guys for your attention and your attending and your attention when you were here. And I hope that this bears fruit for you. So go forth and pray, and we'll see you all in church in just a few minutes. All right, thank you.